Welcome to the Devil in the Details podcast with your host, Will Nesbitt.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Devil in the Details podcast, the podcast where I investigate and expose ongoing, unlawful, non-consensual human experimentation on innocent men and women in the U.S. and possibly abroad. I am one of those people victimized by this atrocity, and now I am working hard to restore justice by sharing evidence and information in hopes of prompting a proper investigation. Join me in my fight and help raise awareness by tuning in and sharing this podcast with your family and friends. Hello, and welcome to the Devil in the Details podcast. I am your host, Will Nesbitt. Thank you for joining me today. Let's get into it. There are many safeguards in the form of laws and rules and regulations that are meant to protect us, to protect people from the harms and dangers of non-consensual experimentation. The Belmont Report and also the Nuremberg Code. For example, these documents were created and agreed upon by the leading doctors and physicians of their time, the ones who established these regulations. These documents were designed to prevent events like the Holocaust, the experiments that happened during the Holocaust, and the radiation experiments, some of which I've covered here on the show. They're designed to prevent those things from happening again. But as we all know, people in power tend to always find ways to get around the law. They being universities with the help and cooperation of U.S. government agencies, find creative and nefarious ways to cause harm to innocent people without their consent and many times without their knowledge, all in order to achieve their objectives, believing that what they do is for the good of the nation or humanity. If that's the case, then why don't they use their own family members and friends for these experiments? If it's for the good of mankind, why not blast your dear old mom with radiation? Why not inject your children with this new drug? Why not expose your husband or wife to these bioweapons? If that sounds absurd and cruel to you, then imagine how the victims and their families who've experienced these experiments, imagine how they feel when they're subjected to these harmful experiments. In researching the laws against non-consensual human experimentation, I came across the article that we will be reviewing in this episode. And actually, this was going to be a series, maybe 2 or 3 episodes, where we will look at key points from the article and discuss those. The article is called When Human Experimentation is Criminal, written by L. Song Richardson. L. Song Richardson is a professor of law at the UC Irvine School of Law. The article was published in 2009 in the Journal of Criminal Law and Criminology, Volume 99. I believe this to be the most comprehensive work on the subject from a legal standpoint because it discusses how people in power can get away with non-consensual human experimentation with little to no punishment. This is a very good article, well written, and easy to understand. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, real quick, before we get started, let me just say that I am not a medical professional, nor am I a legal professional. Okay. I don't work in either field. I've never worked in either field. I am a lay person. I am the layest of persons. Okay. But I do have a certain level of experience on the topic of non-consensual experimentation that informs me enough to be able to speak on it. Okay. So when listening to my commentary, just please keep that in mind. And I would love to hear your comments, and your thoughts on the topic, on the episodes, so we can work this thing out together. All right. All right. Let's get started here. When Human Experimentation is Criminal by L. Song Richardson. Medical researchers engaged in human experimentation commit criminal acts seemingly without consequence, whereas other actors who violate bodily integrity and autonomy are routinely penalized with convictions for assault, fraud, and homicide. Researchers escape criminal punishment. This article begins to scrutinize this under-criminalization phenomenon and provides a framework for understanding why researchers are not prosecuted for their crimes. It argues that their exalted social status, combined with the perceived social benefit of their research, immunizes them from use of the criminal sanction. Whether these constitute sufficient grounds to give researchers a pass from punishment is a significant question, because the state's failure to act creates expressive harms. It displays attitudes towards victims and perpetrators that negatively affect the values of autonomy and dignity in medical research. Moreover, alternative sanctions not only lack the same expressive impact, but may also inadequately police criminal harm. This article concludes that this implicit immunity is harmful to society and inconsistent with criminal law policy. Basically, in this intro, it's saying that it's hypocritical to punish other criminals who go out and commit crimes that, had they been committed by anyone else, non-professionals, then it's hypocrisy to turn a blind eye when someone in the medical profession does it, or when a government agency does it. That's hypocrisy. You're saying it's okay to violate someone's rights, okay, for the sake of science, for the sake of medicine, for the so-called good of humanity. You're saying it's okay. Mugger on the street goes up, tries to steal someone's car or purse or wallet or whatever, and bangs someone over the head and, tortures this person. They go to jail, they get sentenced, and that's that. Right? Mugger takes a knife, cuts someone up in an alley, right, for their wallet. And they're prosecuted for that. Usually. A researcher takes a knife, cuts someone open to examine whatever it is they would be examining, their spleen or intestines or whatever. And that's okay. It's okay to give someone radiation or radium just to see what'll happen if they do it. But it's not okay for anyone else. That's hypocrisy. It's hypocrisy to say this is okay for you to do it because you're a doctor. You're the head of research at whatever university or at whatever U.S. government agency. So we'll allow you to do these things. But you over here, you mechanic, you accountant, you can't do that. That's basically what the intro is saying. And that's really the gist of the entire article. It's clear and blatant hypocrisy, because even if you come away from this experiment with some valuable information about how the body or the mind responds to a particular stimulus, even if you come away with some really good information and some really good data from that, it's how you acquired it that is wrong. You know, you lied to someone and used really sneaky, underhanded methods to hurt them. Right? Same thing any other criminal would do. But it's because we don't see them as criminals. We think it's okay for them because, you know, for them, the ends justify, the means justify. No, wait, the ends justify the means. I knew I had it right. Anyway, introduction. An unacknowledged problem exists in the realm of human subject experimentation. Criminal acts are being committed seemingly without consequence. The individuals escaping punishment are no ordinary individuals. Rather, they are medical researchers whose exalted social status combined with the social benefits of their research appear to immunize them from punishment. Consider the following examples. Pregnant women become unwitting guinea pigs in an experiment testing a medication to prevent miscarriages. As a result, their daughters and sons are at higher risk for cancer. The researchers are never prosecuted. A patient becomes an unwitting participant in an experiment to test the safety and effectiveness of an ocular implant. Before implanting the device, the researcher tells him that it is quite safe and a tried and true method of vision correction, rather than the truth that the FDA has not approved the device. The victim suffers permanent damage to his eye. The researcher is never prosecuted. A healthy 24-year-old woman participates in an asthma study. Doctors ask her to inhale a drug without telling her that this is an experimental use of the drug. Previous inhalations resulted in death, and the FDA has not approved the procedure. She dies. The researchers are never prosecuted. Now, if you look in the footnotes, you'll see where you can find information on these cases these examples that I've just given or just read, because these are real things. Okay. These are not just made up scenarios. These are events that actually took place. So if you want to go and research those and look those up, you can. This article addresses the significant yet largely unexplored question of why medical researchers escape criminal punishment, whereas other actors who violate bodily integrity and autonomy are routinely punished with convictions for assault, fraud, and homicide. Researchers walk away from similar crimes unsanctioned. This article is meant to begin a conversation that considers why criminal sanctions are not utilized in the context of human subject research and scrutinizes whether criminal punishment is an important but overlooked mechanism for protecting the dignitary interests of human subjects. Given the rise in human subject experimentation as a result of biotechnology research, this is a critical and timely question. Indeed, because even right now, with the experiments that are taking place right now, not just the ones that I've been dealing with, but I'm sure there are others that we don't even know about, right? That have yet to see the light of day, that have yet to be spoken of. And because there have been no punishments, that's what gives researchers the boldness to keep doing it. And the reason that they can get away with it is because these are often funded and supported by U.S. government agencies. Now, it's not enough to just say, oh, it's the government. See, when you say things like, oh, the government is doing this and the government is doing that, people tend to start to slap that term on you of being a quote unquote conspiracy theorist, right? Which is shaming language thrown out to make, the person speaking on it look crazy, right? And people automatically say, oh, it can't be true. But for people who think critically and who don't just believe everything that's told to them, right? One of the first questions they're going to ask themselves is this true? Right? So it's not enough to just say, oh, the government's doing, because there are specific agencies that support this nonsense. The U.S. military, huge research funding for radiation experiments. Okay. If you look at all of the examples of radiation experiments that have happened in the past, the U.S. military has sponsored most, if not all of those. And typically what they'll do is they'll get universities who are just so hungry for money and who have the means and the knowledge to carry out these experiments. They recruit them to help make this happen. Hey, we have this new thingamajig and we want to know if it works, or we need a new bobbity boo. Can you make it? And the researchers will say, yeah. Because oftentimes there are often people, and sometimes these people are well-meaning. Sometimes they do things really for science's sake, right? Because there are certain things that, I agree should be looked into, that should be developed. But when you're testing it out, if you would just go about it the right way, if you come to people, I'm pretty sure for, let's say, the parents of Vertus Hardeman, when, he was 5 years old, him and 9 other boys, they were lied to at the local county hospital. They were supposed to be getting treated for ringworm. But what really wound up happening is, their heads were blasted with radiation. Vertus was the one that got the worst of it. Okay. But they told their parents they're going to be treating them for ringworm, and the parents signed permission slips allowing them to go through this quote unquote treatment. And when the parents found out that they were lied to, they did try to get justice for their children. Okay. They did go to the hospital and say, hey, what'd you do to our kids? And they were turned away. Even had the police called on them. They had a court case. They took it to court, and it was basically dismissed because the parents signed a permission slip. Now, This was during the 1920s and 30s. Okay. So things were somewhat different for black folks then. Not much has changed, honestly. But back then it was even worse, right? It was even worse. So there were never any punishments for what they did. Never any punishments. And these were things that were sponsored by the U.S. government, because what they were doing was, they were trying to develop weapons, right? Building bombs. So they wanted to see how the human body would respond to certain types of radiation and certain levels of radiation, harmful levels. And they chose these little black boys, completely disregarding their safety, their health, their futures, all in the name of science. And the government helped implement that by giving money and the equipment to accomplish this task. So when we say the government did it, the government did it. Now, it's important to be specific about which agencies did what. Okay, that is important, because it narrows it down and it makes it a little bit more real, right? To just say a blanket statement, the government, is one thing, but to say the U.S. Army did this, the U.S. Marines did that, the FBI did this, the CIA did that, then that breaks it down. But, these agencies often put out the propaganda that says, oh, no, we wouldn't do that. Government wouldn't do that. Anytime there's that type of narrative that somebody would not do something, they more than likely did that stuff. Okay. You need to look past that and actually think, and you look for the evidence. That's why evidence is so important. Evidence. Right? It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And another note, to use the U.S. government as a blanket blanket name for a perpetrator, is not really too far-fetched, because when you sue the government, number one, you got to get the permission to sue them, which is, to me, is ridiculous. Can I sue you? Let me think about it. Nah, that's all right. I don't feel like it. But when you sue the government, you can't just sue, the FBI or sue the U.S. Army, right? When you sue, the name that you're suing is the United States of America. That's who you're suing, right? Now, those individual organizations are included, but you're suing the United States of America, the government. So in essence, when somebody says the government did something in terms of research harms, they're usually not lying. Anyway, moving on. Page 91, second paragraph there. This article examines two forms of intentional misconduct. The first type of misconduct is that of researchers who conduct experiments on individuals without their knowledge. The second is that of researchers who deliberately fail to disclose to individuals the known and obvious risk of participation in an experiment. This occurs, for example, when a researcher intentionally fails to utilize or significantly alters an approved conformed consent document. The misconduct involves acts that the criminal law typically punishes: intentional, deceptive, and non-consensual contact with the person of another. Let me read that again. The misconduct involves acts that the criminal law typically punishes: intentional, deceptive, and non-consensual contact with the person of another. Okay. That spells it out right there. Why is non-consensual human experimentation wrong? Because it violates the person of another. Plain and simple. And you have to have laws and rules and regulations that are enforced. It's not enough to have them. They must be enforced. The law is only as good as it is enforced. Okay? It's only as good as it is enforced. If it's not enforced, it's just words on paper. It has no meaning until it is enforced. And as we can see, researchers are not self-policing. Okay? They're not self-policing. It's like, when there's an incident and, or like say police misconduct, and, they say, we'll conduct an investigation. And they conduct that investigation and say, oh, we looked at ourselves and see that we did nothing wrong. So that's why it's important to enforce these laws and enforce the rules and regulations. And the criminal justice system must be pushed to do so. And that's up to us, the people, because we can't turn a blind eye to it. And I think that's one of the reasons why these types of things are able to happen, these types of experiments, because we, the people, the public, don't get outraged enough. When we raise enough hell, we get things done. Right? So that's what it's going to take. We're going to have to raise hell to stop these things. And this also touches on, when we talk about conducting experiments without someone's knowledge or consent, a person goes into the hospital for whatever reason, to get treatment for something or, because of an ailment. And you're going there because you trust these people, right? Because that's where you're supposed to go when you suffer some type of bodily injury. And doctors, are given an oath, nurses and all of these people, the professionals, they gain the knowledge and they're given an oath that, hey, we're here to care for people. We're here to heal people, not hurt them. We're here to heal them, not hurt them. Do no harm. And yet people go there, and things happen. Like Elmer Allen. He went to the hospital because he hurt his leg in an accident, at work, working on a train. Was told he had cancer and that they had to amputate his leg. They injected him with plutonium, amputated his leg, and that was it. So for Elmer Allen, going to the hospital, with the purest of intentions, was met with researchers who had ill intentions for him. Completely ruined his life. And there's an episode where I interview his daughter, and she gives a really good interview examining his life. Okay. These acts are customarily prosecuted because they violate one of our most cherished entitlements: freedom from intentional and non-consensual contacts with our person. Let me read that again. Freedom from intentional and non-consensual contacts with our person. So when we look at our freedoms as humans, as Americans, everyone is born with these basic freedoms, unalienable rights. You're not supposed to touch me without my consent, right? You actually have a duty to not harm other people, especially people that are minding their own business and not bothering you. And when someone violates these freedoms, typically, ideally, they're punished, right? They're punished for that. They go to jail, get fired from their jobs. Oftentimes, their social status takes a hit because people tend to look at you differently. And to have those freedoms violated by someone, especially someone that you're supposed to trust, who violates your freedoms, that can be devastating for someone. That can be devastating. Okay, so moving on. Idealization bias and social benefit bias. Idealization bias refers to the difficulty individuals may have in viewing researchers, who are often doctors, as criminals deserving of punishment. Social benefit bias refers to the hypothesis that research misconduct is often ignored or forgiven because of the perceived societal value of the research. So with idealization bias, we tend to look at people in certain professions. We hold them in high regard. And for the most part, they can do no wrong. And it's not just in the medical profession. People in power, whether it be in the religious institutions, in political arena or government institutions, the medical community, these people are, esteemed so highly that they can get away with a lot, especially people with money. Look at religious institutions. Look at what ministers and priests and preachers get away with. And we see it all the time, don't we? Priests violating children, preachers violating members of their congregations. And a lot of times what happens when it's reported or exposed, in the case of Catholic preachers, they're transferred to another church. Not put in jail, not kicked out of the church, simply moved somewhere else. And because there have been no punishments what do you think is going to happen? You think they're going to get there to the other church and say, well, okay, I messed up there. I'm going to do it right this time. And, some people may actually start out thinking that. But if you didn't get punished before, you're more likely going to do it again. Same thing with, lawyers and judges. Misconduct on the bench. Sending people off to, innocent people off to prison, knowing they're innocent, but you do it anyway. Punishments much, much harsher than the offense warrants. And, once these things are exposed, what happens? Nothing. For the most part. Same thing with the medical community. There are plenty of instances, plenty of examples of people harmed by the medical community, harmed by doctors, researchers, and nothing happens. Oh, there may be some lawsuits, but a lot of times they're typically insured, the hospital they work at or whatever. But hardly ever any real punishments where these people are put in jail. When you look at the number of experiments that have been conducted illegally on people, and you look at how there have been very, very few punishments for these things, you'll see that, our idealization bias is a real thing. In fact, when you look at the Jewish Holocaust, the Nazi scientists and researchers who conducted experiments on the Jews, in addition to, torturing and killing innocent people, only a few of those who were put on trial in Nuremberg, only a few of those people were punished. Only a few. A lot of them, you know what happened to them? Some of them escaped, went to other countries, lived out the rest of their lives. A lot of them were brought to the United States and worked for the United States government. Okay? Look up Operation Paperclip. A lot of those researchers were brought here. Look at NASA. Look up the guy who headed up NASA. There are a ton of examples. The United States saw an opportunity. Hey, these guys have some, advancements that we want for ourselves. No punishments. Let's bring them here. We can use them. That is why nonconsensual experimentation continues to be a problem, because the U.S. government agencies and universities benefit from it. And ultimately, the people do, but the few that are sacrificed, is it worth it? To them, you ask them, they would say yes. You ask the victims and their families, I know you'll hear a different answer. They'll say no, it's not worth it. Not one single human life is worth that. Now, it's one thing if you come to someone and you let them know, you say, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to blast you in the head with radiation. We're going to put plutonium in your oatmeal, and we're going to do this and this and this and this. And what's going to happen is, your insides are going to liquefy. You're going to go blind, and you won't be able to walk ever again. Are you okay with that? Right? That's how you get consent. You let them know this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And this is what might happen if we do. You have to give them, make sure you get informed consent, not just say, hey, can we experiment on you? Yeah, sure. That's not it. No, you go to them and you give them detail, and you make sure that these people know exactly what you're doing and exactly what could happen. And after all that, if you want, you have to make sure that they understand it also. And after all that, then you can proceed. Now, if someone, experiences certain harms for that and they signed up for it, that's one thing. But we're talking about the people that had no idea. No idea. Okay. Now, social benefit bias. That's basically saying, well, it's okay because it was for science. Those acts are easily forgiven because, well, it's all for research. It's all, to help cancer patients. It's all to help people with, multiple sclerosis. It's all to help people with, who suffer from infertility. But this is after the harm has been done. And one of the reasons why people tend to forgive it is because of who the experiments are done on. A lot of times these experiments are conducted on marginalized communities, so-called minorities, handicapped, the elderly, people that society feels, or those at the pinnacle of society, those in power, who they feel are expendable. People who they feel are disposable. Oh, that's just, they're handicapped. They don't have much use. Oh, they're just black. So, just another black person that we can get rid of. They're just Asian. They're just, Indian, whatever. They look at these people as nothing, right? They completely dehumanize them. That's why a lot of times in research, they don't refer to them by name. They give them numbers or, code names. That dehumanizes a person, right? So I'm no longer Will. I'm, whatever. That's like Elmer Allen. He wasn't Elmer Allen. He was Cal 3, CAL-3. And that's how they referred to him. To them, he was a subject. He wasn't a man. He wasn't a father. He wasn't a husband. He wasn't a son, a brother, or whatever. He wasn't none of that. He was a subject, like an animal. And when they don't see you as people, that's when they feel that they can do whatever it is they want to do. And social benefit bias is basically where people say, well, it's for the greater good. The end justifies the means. And the means justify the end. But that's not right. It's not right. Continuing. This implicit immunity is harmful because the state's failure to punish researchers creates expressive harms by displaying attitudes towards victims and perpetrators that negatively affect the values of autonomy and dignity in medical research. Again, that's why it's important to make sure that people are fully aware of what's happening and are on board with it. Because, it looks bad. It looks bad for the medical community. That's why people often wonder why Black people don't trust doctors. This is why. Because so many have suffered harms due to negligence and due to intentional acts to harm people, just completely disregarding the lives of innocent men, women, and children just because of their skin color, who think, if something happens to them, it won't be a loss. They're just Black, right? That's how they look at it. So Black folks don't like dealing with the medical community that much because you never know. You don't know who's going to do right, because sometimes some incidents don't go reported. They go unreported. Either people don't want to raise a fuss, or they try to report it and it's ignored and swept under the rug, or they're given a couple of dollars and sent on their way in exchange for their silence. But a lot of times there was really not a big stink made about it. Now, one of the things that's being spoken out against and advocated for is better treatment of Black women in the maternity wards, because they have such a high mortality rate, during childbirth. And it's been like that for a long time. Now people are really raising it as an issue and drawing attention to it. And that's what needs to happen with these non-consensual experiments. There needs to be a push to make sure that when these incidents are reported, the victims are heard, the victims are believed, and something needs to happen. Number one, victims need to be compensated. Number two, the researchers need to be prosecuted. It's not enough to just throw money at folks. See, what they'll do is government agencies, they'll have money set aside for this. That's why a lot of them, researchers, especially universities, are insured. Because what happens is, if something happens, they, just draw from that and go on about their business. No. And even then, the compensation is often very low. Very, very low, for what's happened to people. So there needs to be specific things set in place that people can report these types of incidents and get some type of justice for it. So thinking about all that we've read here today, to sum up this first episode, we're looking at non-consensual experimentation and how people in power tend to escape punishment. And this allows this type of thing to continue. And that shouldn't be. There need to be the rules are there. The rules are there. Laws are in place, but they're not being enforced. And a law is only as good as it is enforced, right? A law is only as good as it is enforced. If it's not enforced, then it's meaningless. It's worthless. It's just words on a page. It's when it is enforced that it has value. So as long as there are no punishments, researchers will continue to say, well, they're going to do it again and again and again. Because you can't depend on them to think about the good of the people that they're experimenting on. They're thinking about themselves and the notoriety that they gain from some new thing that they've developed or some new information that they've come across or discovered. And also, any type of financial gain that they stand to benefit. Because, the U.S. government spends top dollar to get these things done, to develop weapons, to develop treatments, to gather information. They spend a lot of money, billions. And they don't care who they sacrifice. But again, if these things are so important that you want to achieve, if they're so good, why don't you do this to your children? Why not secretly inject your children? Why not secretly inject grandma? You're not going to grandma's house, strapping her down to the couch and, injecting her with the latest, fruit roll-up serum or, whatever. I couldn't think of anything. So if it's so important, why not do that? So we have to call attention to these things. We have to look at it, be aware of it, and advocate for people, advocate for victims, past and present, to prevent more victims in the future. So that's all for today's episode. I really do appreciate you joining me. We will get into the next part. The two biases, we'll start that on the next episode. So hopefully you'll join me. Please share this with your family and friends. If you know people in the legal profession, in the medical field, please share this with them. I want to hear their thoughts. If I'm off base, if I'm going in the right direction, if they agree with the article, let's start a dialogue on this, so we can move things along, so we can move further and make some progress in getting justice for victims of non-consensual human experimentation. Please join my social media pages. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. You'll find all of these links on my link tree. Subscribe to the podcast on Spotify and YouTube. Please visit the petitions that I have at change.org and Color of Change. Please sign those petitions so that we can help get an investigation going into the current non-consensual human experiment that is running right now as we speak. This is something that people must know about. It is causing havoc and destruction in the lives of several people, and this must be stopped. It must. Please sign those petitions and share them. And again, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Stay tuned for part 2 of this series. And that's all for today. Thank you so much. Enjoy your day. Peace.